Yeah. This is the remote. Testing, testing. You're on. You hear that back there?
Everybody here?
Made it difficult for me to read my notes.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming. State Auditor Tom Schweich, and I'm here to deliver the results of our audit of the St. Louis Public Schools. I wanted to begin the discussion today by explaining why we decided to audit the public schools, and then go into what our findings are. Then I'll be happy to answer any of your questions afterwards. This audit that we're doing today, at least today, is part of a new emphasis that our office has put on auditing school districts. One of the priorities I set when I became auditor a couple of years ago was to audit the 4 largest school districts in Missouri. And you may know that about 2 years ago we released the audit of the Kansas City Public Schools, then we released the audit of the Springfield Public Schools, then just earlier this year we released the audit of the Rockwood Public Schools, and now we're releasing the audit of the St. Louis City Public Schools. And that will complete our initiative to audit the 4 largest school districts. St. Louis City Schools ranks either number 1 or 2 depending on the year. Springfield was number 1 one year, the enrollment's very close to the same. But right now I think St. Louis City Schools is actually the largest school district in Missouri. Another part of our educational initiative in the auditor's office was to make sure we audit rural schools, which I will not discuss here today, but we also have a program to do that because we don't just want to do urban schools. And I also started an initiative last year which raised a few eyebrows, which was also to audit at least 1 wealthy school district every year. We shouldn't just focus on the ones that are having funding problems. We should also focus on the ones that are flush with cash, because often you may have a situation where a wealthy school district doesn't feel they need to be as careful with their money because they have so much. So we've tried to be very balanced in the way we approach school district audits, but one of the most critical pieces was to audit the 4 largest school districts. And today I deliver the results of the largest in Missouri, the St. Louis City Schools. When it came to the scope of the audit, we always look at financial condition in any audit we do, so that's the first finding. But we also listen to what other people have to say about what needs to be audited. We have a hotline, people report to that. In this particular case, some of the elected members of the elected school board, like Bill Haas, who's in the audience, and others, had very specific concerns which were important to us and we took those into consideration. Some of you members of the media exposed certain areas that we thought needed further analysis. And then there were some studies that came out that were well publicized about testing irregularities and like it also contributed to scope. Our office goes in, we do an entrance interview, we talk to people from the outside and the inside, and then we decide the scope of the audit. And that's how we determine the issues that you'll hear me talking about today. The rating that we gave the St. Louis City Schools was a fair on our system, excellent, good, fair, or poor. It's the identical rating we gave to the Rockwood School District just a few weeks ago, but for very different reasons. I will say, and I will say at the outset, that I know the St. Louis City Schools have been almost under siege with a lot of bad news lately. They've got a very challenging task ahead of them, and our objective in doing the audit and in releasing the audit is entirely constructive. That said, I will point out that the school district itself was not always entirely cooperative with the audit, and that is really the opposite of what we experienced in Rockwood, where the district was highly cooperative. When we started the audit, we got a letter saying we didn't have the legal authority to do the audit. We got over that. It was not based on any sound legal principles that we could tell. And all the way at the very end, there was resistance to providing the draft copies of the audit to certain people. I think it's very important as I go through these findings that my office, which will come back in 90 days to do a follow-up audit, work very closely with the district, and that the things we're talking about today be taken in the constructive spirit that they're offered. These are important things that need to be changed in the school district, and we're hopeful that there will be a somewhat more cooperative attitude from the district afterward. That said, I wanted to start off first with our first finding in the audit report is relative to the financial condition of the district. As you know, the district engaged in deficit spending from the year 2003 to 2010, was $55 million in debt in 2010, and then made some significant improvements in their financial condition in 2011 through cost cutting, school closures, things that were really serious efforts to bring the costs under control, and finally showed a surplus in 2011. And we thought that was a very good result. However, there was still $55 million in debt, and the school district used money it received from the desegregation settlement with the state in order to wipe out almost all of its debt, which was a good thing, and then provide additional funding to such things as transportation of students, teacher support, information technology, leadership for principals, parent-infant programs, and 25 childhood early assessment classrooms, which was $15.9 million per year. Unfortunately, that desegregation settlement ends in 2014. There may be a little bit of additional money, we understand, but the basic monies will stop coming in. And our concern about the financial condition of the district is there's been heavy reliance on this funding that's really one-time funding, and what happens when it goes away. The response we got from the district was that there may be a voter-approved tax increase, possibly a bond issue. These are unreliable contingencies, or unreliable bases to plan for the future. And we're hopeful that working with the district, we can see more concrete plans that deal with the fact that an important source of funding will dry up, and there is still a risk of going back into a deficit situation. Now, this is not one of our most adverse findings. We are very pleased with the cost cutting we've seen over the past few years. We just know that has to continue, and it's always true when you rely on a single source of funding that's going to run out. You've got to figure out what to do with all the programs that we're relying on that funding, and some very important programs we're relying on funding. And we are not 100% confident the district has a plan to deal with the cessation of that funding, and we don't want to see it going back into a deficit situation. The second area is a more serious finding we had. It's relative to student promotion. We believe that the promotion of students that's going on right now in the St. Louis City Schools in some respects is violating state law. If you look at section 167, 645 of the revised Missouri statute, that's often referred to in jargon as SB 390, Senate Bill 319. It deals with promotion of reading requirements and promotion relative to reading requirements. What we found was 1,800 third and fourth graders that were administered a test in 2011. 749 were identified as at risk. Of those 749, only 372 attended summer school. That means 377 did not attend summer school. Of those who went into summer school, 91 of those students improved. And yet, of the 749 identified as at risk, 747 were allowed to go on to the next grade. Even the 377 who didn't go to the summer school. The district's own accountability office believed this was a violation of Senate Bill 319 and the promotion requirements, and we concur with that it is a violation. There's another law that came into effect as well that hasn't been fully discussed, and that's effective 2007. RSMO 162.11006, that's another statute, says that unaccredited, and it also applies to provisionally accredited districts, cannot promote students who read at least one grade level below their current grade. And yet, the vast majority of 2,000 students who rated below basic in communications from grades 1 to 8 were promoted. We also believe this is a violation of state law. The new district policy calls for holding back only fourth graders reading at least one grade below grade levels, but this statute I just cited applies to all grade levels, not just fourth graders. And we find this very, very problematic. When we talked to people in the district about why there is this noncompliance with state law, we got a response that we felt was unsatisfactory. It may reflect some of the realities of education in the city today, but basically they admitted noncompliance. They said they weren't in quote full compliance, but they really are very far from it. And one administrator, and it's cited in the report, said we just don't have the resources to follow this law. It would put undue financial hardship on the district to comply with these requirements for promotion. Well, I don't know what the priorities are as far as finances go, but at least in our view, students who can't read should be the highest financial priority. And saying that we don't have enough money to do it or comply with the law, and we're going to go ahead and promote students who don't meet the basic reading requirements and who are totally at risk is not the right answer. So we're hopeful that we'll be able to work with the district to come out with a better way to address this very, very serious issue. Our next finding is relative to monitoring of educational programs. St. Louis City Schools have over 1,000 miscellaneous educational programs. These are things called like Focus Friday, cross-curricular writing, tech education tutors, various programs that help students in various ways across the board, from becoming computer literate, working better with parents, those types of activities. We found that there were very inconsistent and outdated policies governing these programs. In our audit, the district could not even identify all of the programs and does not even know of some of the programs, the central district administration. Part of that, we think, is due to the fact that the district cut its accountability office from 8 to 2 people. I've dealt with budget cuts too. We're an accountability organization. It's harder to do your job when you don't have as many people as you used to. You try to find ways to do it, but cutting from 8 to 2, there's only 2 people to really evaluate the efficacy of these programs, and we find that very problematic. In 2010 and a couple of other years, we found in general about 10 program evaluations a year are done. Now, that varies, but about 10. That's 1%. It would take 100 years to evaluate all the programs at that level. That's not an effective level of program evaluation. There's no central repository for program evaluation forms and reports, despite district policy requiring one. And there's no guidance on when you continue or terminate a program. I saw that the mayor's assistant on education was quoted in one of the papers today saying, programs come and they go and there's no continuity. Well, that's exactly right. That's what we're seeing in our audit as well. There needs to be clear criteria for evaluating programs. They need to know about the programs. They need to know if they're working. And if they're working, there needs to be continued sources of funding, which is all in jeopardy right now, the way these programs are run and the poor record keeping that occurs. We looked at the accountability plan. We found it was very good. We are not experts in education, but we are experts in process. And it listed all the right things. The accountability plan relates to student performance, staff qualification, instructional resources, parent involvement, all the things you want in an accountability plan. And by the end of fiscal year 2012, which is the year we did the audit for, 48 of 117 action steps had allegedly been completed, and that's good progress. I mean, it's getting up to close to half of the requirements of the accountability plan. The problem we found was that the scorecards submitted by those charged with reporting on whether the action items had been completed were not complete. Sometimes they were late, and it called into question the accuracy of whether those 48 steps had really been met. And we have more about that in the audit. The district response, again, we thought was insufficient. It said there are a multitude of initiatives. Some of them are not programs, but they qualify them as activities. And if they qualify them as an activity instead of a program, they don't need so much monitoring. It sounds to me kind of like, quite frankly, legal mumbo jumbo. I mean, what difference between a program and an activity doesn't seem to be material to me. I don't agree with the idea that you don't need to monitor it if it only qualifies as an activity. I think an activity is something that's specific to 1 or 2 schools, and a program is something that's district-wide or some definition like that. But my feeling is if you have it, there's resources going to it, it ought to be monitored, and scorecards ought to be accurate on those programs. There was also a statement that a lot of these activities have very small impact on achievement. Well, if they only have a small impact on achievement, then they shouldn't have the program. The money should go somewhere else. When we talk about the problems with accountability plan performance data, you can see the response was that's due to staff changes and shifts. Again, we feel that's an inadequate response to the problem. I want to talk a little bit about the map testing. There was some, I guess, a little bit of misinformation. This was the entire focus of the audit. It wasn't, but we did look at the issue. And it's important to know that as auditors, we're not experts on cheating. So we don't go in and see if somebody's cheating or not. What we look at is, are there procedures in place to ensure there isn't cheating? That's what we look at, and that's what we looked at the audit. As a follow-up to map testing, there was new monitoring procedures put up in place in 2012. They sent out 400, they sent out several, I don't know the exact number of monitors, but they were supposed to produce 400 monitoring sheets. Some of them did more than one, so I don't know the total number of monitors, but we were expecting about 400 monitoring sheets back on the test. When we asked for those 400 sheets, we found 100 were missing, 25%. There were both monitors that were school employees, and there were a few outside monitors as well. We asked if the district try to locate the 100 missing monitoring forms. And some of these people either overpaid and they didn't submit their forms. And they got some of them back, and we were pleased about that, but obviously that data had not initially gone into determining whether there were irregularities because they were missing. But still, even after a concerted effort to get the forms from the monitors who had not submitted them, we found that they could not get any forms for 3 schools and an insufficient number to provide reliable data from another 12 schools. We also found that the district, while it does disseminate information about testing irregularities, DESE gets it, the schools get it, what was lacking, and this is what auditors look for, were specific processes for investigations into large fluctuations. If test scores go up dramatically one year, there ought to be, okay, here's what you need to do now. You start an investigation, here's how it's run, here's what the results are. Those types of things were missing in the district's procedures. The response we got was independent quality assurance monitors or supplementary district employees, you know, they were still being paid $28 an hour. They should have done their job. On map test fluctuations, the district has a very long response about what they do and how the data is disseminated, but it does not address why there are no procedures defining a significant fluctuation, no documentation of any investigation into significant testing fluctuation, or what the guidance is for when you have to start an investigation. So there are improved procedures in place, but they need to make sure the monitors are submitting the data. They need to take the data and they need to notify schools when you need to do an investigation. They need to tell them how to do that investigation so that it's uniform across the district. And then if there really are irregularities, there needs to be a very thorough investigation so whether there was any sort of criminal activity that occurred. Next is the area of procurement and contracting. The district has a requirement for competitive bidding of over $5,000, any contract that's going to be worth over $5,000 unless there's an emergency. So for example, there's a flood, you don't have to go out and get bids, you get somebody to clean up the flood quicker. We understand that. There are circumstances in which competitive bidding should not occur. But what we found is they used the same busing vendor for 9 years, a $24 million contract. While they renegotiate with that contractor, there's never been an attempt to competitively bid the contract in 9 years. We also found the following purchases of over $5,000 for which there was no competition: textbooks, musical instruments, maintenance, and several other areas. In the services area, grant writing, temporary services, legal lobbying services also did not get competed out. The rules are more flexible there, but I found that competition helped. I was a lawyer in private practice before I became your state auditor, and I competed for every case I got. Even for a client I had won 20 cases for, we always competed, kept our prices down. We think it's an important part of the process. In construction contracts, we find a lot of construction contract problems with school districts. In Rockwood, as you know, it was conflicts of interest that was a problem. We did not find that here. But what we found is often there's only one bidder for construction contracts. That was true on tuck pointing contracts, renovation contracts, electrical contracts, demolition contracts. And we look at contracting across the whole state. We see it in every state agency, board, commission, school district. And when we find only one bidder, something's wrong with the RFP process, the request for proposal process. So we ask that in those cases where they can only get one bidder, even if multiple bidders express interest at the outset when initial conferences were occurred, there's something wrong with the process if only one company bids all the time. And we're asking them to take a look at that and find ways to improve it so that there's greater competition in those cases where there's only one bidder. Sunshine law. We found in some cases untimely preparation of meeting minutes. We found items that were approved in closed session that were often not announced publicly as is required by state law. And we found some meetings were improperly closed for purposes that are not allowed under the state sunshine law. Patrick Henry follow-up. As you may know, one of the very first audits I did as state auditor was investigate the allegations that there was attendance inflation in a particular school in St. Louis, Patrick Henry. We had received complaints from teachers and administrators about it. We went in, we did a rapid response because there were allegations that documents were being destroyed, and that's the only time to activate the rapid response team is when there are allegations that documents are being destroyed. We found that a lot of documents actually had been destroyed, but when we compared the manual attendance forms with the computerized attendance forms, there were huge discrepancies that could only be explained with attendance inflation. And that was supplemented by sworn affidavits of teachers and an administrator that there was deliberate attendance inflation going on. The individual charged was or about whom the charges were made was dismissed, and there was some action taken, which we appreciate, to make sure that this type of activity does not go on in the future in other schools. However, we also recommended that there be adjustments to the attendance made, that accurate attendance be there, because it's not only important for reporting accurate attendance in the schools, but it also affects the funding of the school. And the response we got, again, was problematic. The response we got was, well, if we'd gone through all the trouble to adjust the attendance, the maximum impact it would have had would have been $145,000, and that's not material. I don't think that's an acceptable response, and we're hopeful that they'll go back and revise that as well. Finally, the district has an independent auditor. The auditor doesn't do the kinds of audits we do, which are called performance audits, which are wide-ranging. They focus mostly on finances. But the independent auditor of the school district has made recommendations for many years that have not been implemented yet. They're basic things: better preparation of financial statements, better records of capital assets, improved data security, And also, it's been recommended that there be an internal audit function in the city schools. This was the same recommendation I made in Springfield, and they did go ahead and provide an internal audit function. Keep in mind, this school district, we perceive it as it should be, as an educational district, as something that's designed to help our children, but it's also a $370 million a year business. And I don't know of many $370 million a year businesses that don't have an internal audit function to do the things that we can't do. I can't come in every year. I've got to do 150 audits a year. I've got a small staff. I do every state agency, board, commission, school district. I can't come in and do it all the time. Your independent auditor can only come in once a year. Having continuous monitoring is the best way to make sure that fiscal resources are properly spent, and we hope that the school district will consider putting in an internal audit function. I believe it will cost a little money to have an internal audit function, but the cost savings that will be realized will much more than offset the amount of money it costs to have that function. That is a very brief summary of what we found in our audit. There's a lot more detail in the audit. I'm happy to have Bob MacArthur and Mark Reether, who really did an excellent job, very intensive job of working with the district on this audit. And I'm happy to answer any of your questions, or if I can't, they will be happy to answer them for
Could
you.
you talk a little bit more about the lack of cooperation? I mean, and compare it to some districts that you've done it?
Yeah, I mean, no one likes to be audited. I understand that. I get audited twice every 4 years. I don't like to be audited. It's not a fun thing. But the rule number one of auditing is the auditors are there to do their job. They're not there to hurt anybody, to embarrass anybody. They're there to improve the quality of the organization being audited, and it's always a good idea to have an outsider take a look at it from time to time. So when we went in and said we want to do this audit based on the fact that I want to do the top 4 school districts, based on the fact there have been a lot of bad publicity about certain things, based on the fact that Bill and some of the members of the elected board brought some interesting concerns to us, we said we're going to do an audit, which, by the way, I have absolute legal authority for under state law, unlimited authority to audit school districts. It's one of the areas where I have complete original jurisdiction. The first thing I get is a letter saying you don't have the authority to do a performance audit. Well, almost every media organization here has pointed out that the state auditor, dating back to Kit Bond, has done performance audits. And because of this, what I thought was a silly argument, we actually got the legislature to pass a law this cycle just stating explicitly I can do performance audits, take that ridiculous argument off the table. But this has been done for 45 years. I don't need a letter saying I don't have the authority to do the audit. It does not set things out on a good start for the audit, and that was a problem for us. As we proceeded through the audit, there were a few obstacles put up. There was a lot of effort to try to keep certain things confidential from the elected board and the like. And then if you look at the answers, compare the answers that we got here, where we put the responses in, with the responses we got in Rockwood, which was a very harsh audit, and it was very, very painful for the people in Rockwood, and I understood that. And some people, probably didn't get reelected to the board because of that audit, or at least it contributed to it. But the district recognized that they needed a dose of medicine, and they said, we're going to put a website up, we're going to monitor our improvement of each of these areas. You can track it in real time. I went back and did my follow-up, and it was one of the high points of my time being auditor. They had corrected every problem. They had done a good job of it. They were constructive in their approach. And while this audit didn't start off or finish the first part of it on the best terms, I'm optimistic that we can work with the superintendent and members of the special administrative board to really implement these recommendations, make the improvements, because the ultimate objective is only one thing, and that's to improve the education of children. That's all we care about. That's all you care about. Let's work together to get it done. Other questions?
Under contracts and disbursements, it talks about, it says the district paid monthly vehicle allowances, $800 to superintendent, $300 to the
Right.
former CFO, which do not appear reasonable. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Well, number one, there was an IRS problem with it. They weren't properly reported to the IRS. And number two, $800 a month for a vehicle, all we do is look at what happens around the state, and it seemed to us to be excessive. But I don't consider that one of the major findings. Look, if there hadn't been all the other problems, I wouldn't even worry about it. But there was a tax problem with that, an income tax problem with that issue, which is discussed in the report. And $800 a month is it's a pretty nice car. And when a district is struggling, I think they ought to consider something more modest. But again, that's a subsidiary finding of the audit. Yes.
What do you consider the major point of this audit?
The major points would be, I think, the second and third findings. Student promotion is not in compliance with state law, and monitoring of educational programs is weak. And I would probably add right after that is it doesn't look like the monitoring, the map testing is adequate to ensure there's no cheating. We didn't find any cheating, but we don't really look for cheating. That's not what our expertise is. We look to make sure the district will prevent cheating. So I would say those three, actually.
So is this district healthy? I mean, you give it a fair rating?
No. I mean, it's not a disaster. We've given floors out before, too. Usually when we give a floor rating, it's because somebody's stealing money or it becomes, when we see intentional misconduct, it's usually the reason somebody gets a floor. But this was a fair, and I have to say in our office, we don't usually have any debate about what the rating ought to be. Usually falls pretty, we publish the criteria. The lack of cooperation almost pushed it into the poor category, but I don't feel that's the superintendent's fault. He's been a very good person to work with. We like Dr. Adams. I think there was a lot of interference, legal interference, other things, defensive attitude taken by outsiders. And so I don't really blame him for the problem. But the lack of cooperation almost pushed it into the lowest category, but we didn't think that was fair because if you look at it just objectively, it falls pretty neatly to our criteria for a fair.
When you say there was a defensive attitude, I mean, do you feel that came from the appointed board?
In some cases, yes.
Question.
Yes.
You mentioned about the instability as relates to future finances. Are you prepared to work with the legislature and everybody else to address the school formula issue and ensure, I mean, you said getting these kids a good education is important. You said that finances is critical for that to happen. So I'm just wondering, are you prepared based on the statements you made and what you discovered to talk to the legislature about changing the formula process and getting more funds into the urban school centers that need it?
Well, what we do, and we've done this all the time, is we view our audits as a major tool for the legislature. I have hired a legislative liaison. We go in there and we testify about the findings of our audits and what needs to be done. And we work very closely, more closely, I think, than any auditor ever with the legislature to make sure that we fix the problems. Part of the problem has to be addressed through continued cost cutting and savings and fiscal responsibility. If there's a shortfall in funding, though, that's another issue that we can address, and we always work with the legislature. And I think your legislators would say that there probably hasn't been an office that does more to work with the legislature.
And the second question is that you talked about programs versus activities.
Right.
So I want to give examples such as, say, if it's a school that has an active PTA and the parents are coming into the school to help out to do something that's not happening district-wide, should that be considered a program or activity, or are you saying it should not take place because it's not district-wide?
No, it's the opposite. What I was saying is they should be monitoring all programs, whether they're in one school or across the whole district, and that's not happening.
But would that PTA scenario where the parents are coming in to help that single school, would that qualify as a program or activity?
Well, you have to ask the district that, but based on what they told us, it would qualify as an activity, not a program. And that has a lesser level of monitoring.
And so in your audit, you differentiated program versus activity. So I'm just trying to figure out, is that activity an issue of the audit as it relates to when you talk about programs and activities?
What we did is point out there's over 1,000 programs and there's not a lot of monitoring. The response we got was a lot of these aren't really programs, they're just activities, which seems to be semantic. It seems to be, not material. And what we're pointing out is that programs and activities all need to be monitored. You can't say we're not going to monitor it because it's an activity.
Would the principal of that school be sufficient to monitor to see whether that activity is doing what it's supposed to be doing, or do you expect that to happen?
Well, what we're looking for is reporting to the central district so that they know what's going on. That's what we're looking for.
Should the public be satisfied with the integrity of the map results?
I'm sorry, there's two people on. Bill, why don't you ask your question?
Yes. First, thank you for the efforts of your people and your office on the audit and your press conference. Nothing problematic about those. I have a question. Since the statutory responsibility of the elected board is something in the nature of auditing and reporting, when you say that you look forward to working with the special appointed board to address your concerns of your audit, do you see a role to be played in that by the elected board as well?
Bill, that's a legal question I'm not going to get into. What I do know is primary responsibility for implementation of corrective action resides with the special administrative board. But we've kept you informed throughout the process, and we intend to continue to do so because you do have the residual audit function. That's correct.
We got time for one more question.
I'll do a couple more. Yeah.
So should the public be satisfied with the integrity of the map results?
No. I mean, when monitoring forms aren't being submitted, you don't know. Yes.
You
talked about coming back in 90 days. Did you come back, was there a follow-up to Patrick Henry, and what do you plan to do in 90 days when you do come back and follow up?
Yeah, and the 90-day follow-up team is something I put in place when I became auditor. If somebody receives a low, fair, or a poor, we come back in 90 days to see if there's corrective action taken. Patrick Henry was a rapid response. It was a narrow issue. Our follow-up this time will take into account the Patrick Henry situation as well. But this is low enough of a rating that we will come back and do the 95, which is exactly what we would, by the way, with Rockwood and Springfield and Kansas City.
Can you offer some more specificity about the number and or frequency of sunshine violations? And are we talking about willful violations versus inadvertent?
I think it's inadvertent, but there were some. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but I think that often when people are focused on the substance of what they're doing, they don't worry so much about the process. And we remind people the Sunshine Law is an extremely important tool in Missouri for open government. And the violations we saw here were not excessive compared to other school districts.
Mr. Schweich, real quick, my name is David Jackson with the elected board. Three quick questions. One, going to the financial condition of the school district. And, you know, we were told that the Special Administrative Board purposely ran a deficit between the years of 2008 and 2011. But they also cut $50 million from their budget between the same years, 2009 and 2011. So a question came up as to why did they need to borrow why did they need to get the $95 million from the DSEG program if they intentionally ran a deficit? Where were the cost savings between the years of 2009 and 2011 when they ended up with a $55 million deficit?
It's a good question, but when we looked, we heard that allegation. When we looked into it, though, we found actually over time they eliminated the year-to-year deficit and actually ran at a surplus. And they're probably going to run at a surplus this year too. It's just not a very big surplus. And they used the desegregation money to wipe out the previous debt that they had, which seems like an appropriate use of the money to us. We're not the experts, but it looked appropriate. Our concern is going forward when the DSEG money runs out. There's a lot of programs that are dependent on that money. Are they just going to eliminate them? Are they going to reduce them? Where's the funding going to come from? And some of them are very basic things like transportation is being paid for. Some transportation is being paid for by the DSEG money. So I didn't find any evidence of intentionally running a deficit. It looks like that financial condition improved over those years, and there was actually a surplus in the fiscal year before the audit started.
As it relates, one other question as it relates to the purchasing policies and procedures and contract enforcement, based upon your findings and our responsibility of auditing and reporting to the public, and since the state appointed board refused to work with the state auditor, would you recommend that maybe we need to look at auditing the Proposition S bond issue activities?
I'm not going to, that's a very political issue, and I don't think it's appropriate to comment on. What I would tell you is, though, you need an audit function in that school that looks at everything, and that may be encompassed by that.
Thank you.
One more?
You gave a rating of fair to the district.
Right.
Put that in terms that we all understand, if we were giving a grade at school, that
It's a
needs
C.
scale, C. And then in the situation of the Henry Elementary School, for example, where some of those recommendations have not been implemented, how optimistic are you that we come back in 90 days that some of the recommendations you made this time around will be implemented, or at least good faith shown?
Very optimistic. Number one, they did take the findings and change the district-wide procedures to prevent that from happening again. And that's the most important thing. They did do the number one thing. What they didn't do was correct the problem at that actual school, and that's what we're asking them to do. I'm optimistic they'll do that. And this could be a $145,000 problem, but I think it's worth it. Okay, thank you all for coming. I very much appreciate it.
What I will do is go home and read the whole thing, and then if I have any questions, I'll be able to. But I think it's pretty much says what it says, and that's all. I mean, everything is like, you read more about what's going on and some of these issues that I follow. I wasn't expecting
us together, so, baby, how you doing? Oh, what'd you do with that? I'm sorry.
It's interesting.
Oh, yeah.
It's very interesting that the SED was so defensive about it. And that's very telling.
I think it was actually pretty nice. I really didn't come as much as I thought they would.
She'll leave you over here.
And the written copy has even more in it.
We got some good natural light here.
Definitely stuff. I have no time to spend. Well, maybe I will the second half of the year, right before the 20th. My mom is.
You're not recording yet, so give me a second. I will get you still.
Yeah, I've had 3 trips pulled out of me in the last minute for family things. I was in the office 8 days in office. She's okay. She's getting surgery again. We're gonna try again to replace
This is a directional sound.
I need.
Everything over here is probably okay, as long as this is okay.
You were fine. He returns to doctor. He's in the call.
But
Yeah, she did. It's
always be below the chin.
She's in the license. Well, I've been going crazy. I'm out of town again. Like right after our meeting at 10, or like at 6 a.m. on the 11th. Yeah, I did. I got it done. I went to first. Which I wanted to St. Charles. It was okay. It was okay. Oh, wow.
Do you want to go? He's on the who is it? Do you have any remarks that you thought of? No. Anything I want to say here? We should we'll shoot some B-roll. Okay, we'll do some B-roll.
This is Bill Hunt. We've been buddies. I hear you. Let me go do this interview for them. Excuse me, Bill.
Push that pause button, so it's.
Yes, sir. Oh, let me take my notes, because I've been taking notes, so I can give you more of a definitive
Get us in the right
interview.
spot. Okay, yeah, I'll get you guys set up. And you can look at each other. I mean, if you want to look at the camera, that's fine as well.
Okay.
But okay, you tell us when you're ready. 1 second. I'm just gonna answer your- Okay.
Oh, okay, so you don't want specifics. Okay.
Senator, we just heard from Auditor Schweich on the status of the St. Louis Public Schools. What's your overall impression of the audit?
I was surprised at the rating of fair, which is not very optimistic, and there were obviously numerous reasons for that Auditor Schweich gave us. The first one, from my perspective, that is most troubling, because I've always cared about students getting a quality education, is that the students are being promoted in violation of the law when they can't read. And the law states that if you're more than a year behind in reading, that you are held back, that you're given extra help during the summer, and virtually all those students were promoted. I think what happens as a result of that is a story that broke my heart at a hearing I had down here about 2 years ago. And the story was a testimony from the Army recruiter, and her job is to recruit Army candidates. And she said they